Hello, my name is Rabbi Eli Friedman of Congregation Road of Shalom, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our latest interview with our Breaking Bread on Broad partners. Breaking Bread on Broad is a food distribution site at our synagogue in Philadelphia's Center City North neighborhood. Our neighborhood is defined as a food desert, meaning access to a supermarket within half mile of most residents is a significant challenge. Of course, as many of you know, Philadelphia has the highest level of poverty of the largest cities in the United States, and this impacts Philadelphia's citizens in many ways, with jobs, public education, and health. Breaking Bread on Broad began in 2018 as a 3-month summer program administered through the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Road of Shalom became one of many faith-based and secular organizations participating in the federally funded program. The program provides breakfast, lunch, and recreational and educational programs to Philadelphia School District students during the months of the year when school isn't in session. And by enlisting high school-age students, it provides volunteer and leadership opportunities for older students to develop their ready-to-work skills. In March 2020, the pandemic hit, closing schools and disrupting the method of distributing breakfast and lunches previously provided in schools during the year. Within a matter of weeks, the federal program started providing a pre-packaged box, each containing 5 breakfasts and 5 lunches, that families could pick up once a week at approved locations, such as Congregation Road of Shalom. We told the Archdiocese each week during the pandemic how many school-age kids were estimated, our families included, and the Archdiocese delivered the matching number of meals and milk cartons. Our food distribution program is supported by volunteers and some key corporate and nonprofit organizations. Our volunteer group has grown from a handful to about 25 dedicated, hardworking congregants, and we have been joined by non-congregants who became aware of our weekly food pantry. One neighborhood woman saw our operation and became one of our most devoted volunteers. Another, a Mandarin-speaking leader of Girls Rock Philly, has helped enormously by being a translator and goodwill ambassador for our Asian families. We hope you enjoy this interview as you learn more about our various partners and this important work which we are doing. Thank you.
Welcome. My name is Dan Seltzer. I'm on Congregation Road of Shalom's Breaking Bread on Broad leader team, along with Ellen Poster, Eric Dickstein, and Rabbi Eli Friedman. Today, I'm talking with Jeff and Scott Brown. Jeff is the Chief Executive Officer of Brown's Superstores, a 4th-generation family-owned business of 13 supermarkets in the Philadelphia region. Operating as ShopRite and fresh grocer stores, Brown's Superstores was an early and critical corporate partner of Breaking Bread on Broad. Brown's Superstores donated a significant amount of food to us as we evolved into a neighborhood food pantry from a summer-only program. As you will hear, Jeff is deeply committed to the Jewish social value of tikkun olam, Hebrew for repair the world. Addressing food insecurity is one of several core social justice principles of his business. Brown's Superstores also repairs the world in several other ways, through hiring and training people returning from incarceration, developing manuals for businesses to replicate the practices he's implemented, clearing the records of those who have served their time, and improving high school student graduation rates. Jeff's 2 sons now represent the 5th generation in this unique family business. Scott, like his brother, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, grew up working in the family grocery business. He started working in the family business at a young age, and following in his father's social justice footsteps, is engaged in reintegrating returning citizens into careers in the food service industry and pursuing a degree at St. Joseph's University's food marketing program, focusing on addressing food insecurity. As you see, this is not a typical business. It's unusual when a business stays within one family for 5 generations, but what is even more unusual is the business model upon which Brown's Superstores operates. its connection to social justice rooted in Judaism's values and traditions, and its commitment to Philadelphia's neighborhoods. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I'd like to start off with a question for you, Jeff. As I mentioned, you stepped in at a critical time for Congregation Road of Shalom's Breaking Bread on Broad food pantry. Brown's Superstores donated a significant amount of food, selected by your store's manager to complement the Latinx population in our neighborhood. The store's manager's ability to do this wasn't an accident. Please talk about that a little bit, but also within the context of how your family grocery business grew from its corner grocery store beginnings to your business today.
So I'll start out with that because it's a story I think that's not uncommon for a lot of Jewish immigrants to Philadelphia. My great-grandfather, whose family was from Russia, and my grandfather, whose family from Poland, immigrated here to Philadelphia, United States. And my grandfather probably would have gotten the job if they were willing to hire him, but he spoke broken English, and it wasn't the most popular to be an immigrant back then. And they ended up opening a corner grocery store. And the family have had different grocery businesses. I think all four generations have had different grocery businesses, but the sort of trade of being a grocer, and in particular, being a grocer that's concerned about people that are trapped in poverty and deal with inequities, has always been at the root of our family's work. And all of the generations have done a large percentage of their business in more challenging, underprivileged communities. And as a young boy, maybe at 8 years old, my dad worked 7 days a week. He would wake up early in the morning to buy the produce and come home late at night. I wanted to spend time with him. As an 8-year-old boy, I used to go to work with him at his store in West Philadelphia, 40th and Girard. And working in that store, my dad and I were the only two Caucasians in the business. And, at that time, it didn't really occur to me that there was an issue surrounding race. It seemed coincidental to me. Everyone got along in the business. We all worked to serve the customers. They were always very, very, very nice to me, helpful to me. All the workers were glad to teach me what they knew. And I grew up with a lack of understanding of some of the troubles around race that exist in the world, because it didn't exist where I went to work. Of course, later I went to school and learned that things were not that way everywhere. And those early impressions really have framed my life's work, centered around the issue of people, structurally, permanently trapped in poverty that can't seem to escape, and sort of the inequity that sort of aids in their stickiness into poverty. And it is true that we've used our business through the generations to try to alleviate poverty and inequity. But we've also expanded over time, besides our business, into nonprofits and some government work to sort of look at the problem holistically and see what we could do to impact things. And I don't want to keep on going if I'm answering more than what you asked, but probably maybe 10 years in my work, in my own business, because I was the first generation to start with ShopRite and bring ShopRite to the Philadelphia area. The first couple stores weren't food desert type locations, but by the fourth store, we had already started to focus on that before there was a term for it. And of course, by the fifth store, we had a purposeful strategy to bring joy to the lives of the people we serve, and particularly to focus on locations that did not have access to healthy and affordable food. And we started to work with the government and nonprofits to tinker around, to talk to communities, and to understand what's going on, and to see how we could use our grocery business to make things better for them.
Yeah, it sounded to me like you had a goal, which was to help the families, the poorer families, the families in the not in the best neighborhoods. But then you implemented the strategy of engaging the community in the kind of business that they would respond to and support. That's a fascinating idea. Why don't you talk about that for us?
So when we were about to open, we had one store that was in a food desert before they called it that. That was predominantly African-American consumers. And you know what, when we started to get presented studies about a 15 or 20-year difference in life expectancy from populations that are 1 mile apart or 2 miles apart, we started to understand the insidious implications of food deserts. And so the first purposeful location was in Southwest Philly at Island and Lindbergh. And that was a supermarket that had closed. It was unsuccessful financially, and it had repeated gun violence. And that was a test store. And we had worked with Representative Dwight Evans, who was then chairman of appropriations for the House, and Ed Rendell was the governor. And we started to educate ourselves on food deserts and start to craft the first of its kind Pennsylvania Fresh Food Financing Initiative. So that's like a public-private partnership innovation to try to bring resources to build stores in food deserts. But I bring that as a background. But yes, we had financing to do it, private and some public. But what I didn't understand is, why do all the supermarkets fail in food deserts? And so to better inform myself, I started a process which we never ended, which is to have town hall meetings. And we'd have town hall meetings in impoverished areas where we thought there was an opportunity to solve this problem. And we would listen. I would go in front of the groups. It started out with 100, but you know, over recent times, sometimes we draw on the thousands of community residents, and they just stand up and tell me about the problems they're experiencing, their difficulties with the way business operates and how it disadvantages them, their difficulties with finding employment. And they would start to give me a whole host of challenges they face in a very honest fashion, because I'm not responsible for what happened, but at some point they believed I might be the answer to help improve things. And you know, just because it wasn't food in the beginning, it was all about food, how we operate a food store. But the more we did it, the more we would get other assignments to work on. And some of them seemed like they didn't really apply to a grocery business, but we really didn't look at it that way. If it was a problem that affected a community we served, we were interested in using our sort of entrepreneurial design thinking to see if we can't come up with something to make things better. And each at bat, each town hall meeting, I'd come back with solutions I worked out. I'd present them for feedback. And I would hear feedback from what we had already implemented, what they liked about it, didn't like about it. And it was really a tremendous part of refining what we did. That sort of grassroots, direct from the people we were trying to help feedback.
Yeah. Well, we're going to pick up on that thread of the story in a few minutes, but I wanted to give Scott a chance to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about him. Scott, you told me last week when we spoke that you began in one of the neighborhood supermarkets, much like it sounds like your father, when you were about 13. What was that like for you? And how did your experiences there open your eyes to social issues?
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. You know, I started when I was about 13, first in the bakery in one of our stores. You know, my dad always sort of had the goal for us to, you know, work up from the bottom and really understand every aspect of the business, whether we wanted to go into it or not, just to sort of teach us, you know, what things he learned there and, you know, the values that he got. And I thought that was really important because, you know, you see a lot of businesses where someone, you know, just goes and takes over because their parents started it. And it doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense because they didn't really understand exactly what went into the business. So yeah, I started in the bakery and I stocked shelves. I was a cashier. And I also went to work for other businesses who had, you know, stores not owned by us. And so I worked at a supermarket down the shore, and I worked for Dietz and Watson to learn how to cut meat. And salad works to, learn how they, made salads differently. And so it was sort of my way of, I understood how our supermarkets worked, and I wanted to understand how people did what we did, but differently.
Did you notice any difference in the camaraderie or the employee relations at other grocery stores versus the ones in your family business?
Yeah, I think one thing that was especially different that I noticed at first was, in our stores, people feel almost as if someone really cares and is there, to hear about what's going on in their lives. When I worked for Dietz and Watson, I would go to Acme a lot, and people just felt like it was a large corporation, and there wasn't necessarily someone there who actually wanted to, take care of them or something like that. We also found at our stores that a lot of people, the parents worked there, and then the kids came and worked there, or the wife came and worked there. And so, really had a sense of family between employees and things like that. And that really felt good also because, it's one thing to, go have a job somewhere, but to create a career somewhere and then bring your family up in that same business really shows, how meaningful something was to your family's life. I worked with someone in the store that I was in who he worked for my grandfather. And then when my grandfather sold his stores, he came and worked for us. And so his whole life and his family's whole life, his job was created from a business, food business owned by our family. And so that was, a really meaningful thing to him where, it wasn't that we just gave him a job. We really were family to him, and he would hug me and we would talk about, history and things like that I never knew about, which was really incredible to see.
Mm-hmm. So to me, in my experience, that doesn't come about by accident. So I'm going to throw this question back to Jeff. How did you make that happen? What were some of the things that you did?
Well, the human side, what I learned, I almost exclusively got from my dad. And my dad loved people. And probably by today's standard, he was more outwardly affectionate than maybe what you would say, which he passed down to me. And it was very common for him to hug our customers, our employees, and hear their stories and tell stories. And that's where I learned it. It's definitely nothing you learn in a book. But that's what I witnessed. That's what I learned. And whatever problems, because life has lots of challenges, whatever problems you're confronting, having a team that cares about you really just makes it better. So all your decisions, you're not just thinking about the mathematical consequence of it or the profit consequence. You have these very long-term relationships and relationship investments. Mm-hmm. And so we tend to think about things in a much different way. And matter of fact, if I could tell you a quick story, one of the employees that started his career with my dad, of course, my dad had sold out and I started again, and he waited till I reopened to come join us. One day, his wife wanted to go back to school and they were short the money. And I was a young kid out of college and I lent him the money. And I didn't really ever get involved in lending employees money before. So I assigned some small interest rate, made him sign a note, and he borrowed the money, paid back the money. And after he paid it back, he sat me down and he said, "I'm going to teach you something. I don't know how much money you made on that little interest rate. I don't imagine it's very much, but I felt bad about that because I feel like we're family and you shouldn't have charged me the interest." And, I really didn't think about it at the time. I went to college, I was a finance guy, and that's what you do with notes. I didn't think about the human side, which was a different part of my education. And I rebated him back all the interest. And I didn't do that anymore. We help our employees, we never charge interest anymore because the money didn't really matter. The point was that we would be there for each other. And it definitely has worked both ways, where people have been there for me when I needed them and I've been there for them. And it doesn't sound like a modern business strategy, but literally, like Scott said, people work their entire career for us, and sometimes their family and their kids come in and work their entire career for us. And I know that's old fashioned, but I tell you, it seems to me a lot better than sort of old number-oriented way that society has developed, where people work for a place for a year or two, they go to the next place and the next place and the next place. It seems like it just doesn't end well that way. And so even if we're the only ones doing that or one of the few that do it, we like this way of doing business.
Mm-hmm. So I want to pick up on something that you'd said a little bit earlier about the town hall meetings, and then tie it with something that I had said in the introduction about it wasn't an accident that you carried food in that store that was culturally complementary to our Latinx neighbors. And I think I remember from our previous conversation that part of the purpose of the town hall meetings was to talk about the kinds of food that the community would like to buy, which they might not be able to get elsewhere locally. And that became a key component of your business model.
Yeah. So, and because this is a program through a synagogue, I probably never mentioned this before, but there's a model in my mind about a connection between religion and people and how we celebrate around food. And I always think about gefilte fish and chicken noodle soup and sort of the foods of our people. And I always believe that is something that's so human that we celebrate with family and friends around the food of our culture or our religion. And, in my mind, I'm always curious and interested about how that applies to different groups. And so when I'm in town hall meetings, I'm always looking for something different than what I understood so I could learn about it. And then I have a model in my mind about how humans operate, how they celebrate, how they use their faith, how they have dishes that go back sometimes thousands of years. And it almost doesn't even matter if you like that food. It's so ingrained in your culture, you're going to eat it when it's the holiday to eat it. So I'm always asking about these things. And over the years at town hall meetings, when someone's dressed differently, talks with an accent, or tells me anything that I don't understand, I always pull them aside and learn. And, in my dad's business, we had a store outside of Camden because my dad's stores were in New Jersey. And we served a predominantly Latinx community. And, I had learned a lot about their food. But in my business today, more than 50% of my business are Black customers. And I say Black because they're not African Americans. I have African Americans, but I have Africans, Western Africans. I have Jamaican customers, people from all over the world. And they have different religions and they have different food. And the model works consistently among all groups. And I'm dying to know your food. That's just my personality. And so I met a person in an African garb and I was dying to talk to him. And we had set up a meeting and, I'm going through my list of questions: religion, food, what do you celebrate with? What are your holidays? And we basically built our business on those understandings. We've customized every store to the people that live there and celebrate the holidays, especially the food that they have for their holidays, every single person we meet.
That's great. That's great. So, Scott, I mentioned that you were involved in an academic program on food marketing, and you've had this experience of working in your family business where your lived experience is sort of consistent with what your father was just describing. How do you think the academic approach to a topic like food marketing is dealing with the kind of experience that you and your father get on a daily basis when you're working with people who come from different cultures?
Yeah, I would start off with I'm not historically the best of students, and so in the past I probably would say, just as a kid I didn't feel like academics was worth it, and I had a lot of, like you said, lived experiences that I felt couldn't be taught in a class, which I still feel that way. However, I did have some things at St. Joe's that I thought were really helpful. We talk about the topic of food marketing, which is not a really common major at other universities, but everyone has sort of a pretty basic marketing program. And what I think is different is you have a program that's focused on marketing of food, which people, like my dad said, relate to food so differently than they do, products that you buy at Target or things like that, where, food is such a long-term emotional thing for people. And so, one thing I do really admire about, a program like this is, a lot of places don't really teach you how to emotionally connect to people or how to think about different cultures. I know at St. Joe's they also have a strong international food marketing program, and so that lets you think. Here's the appropriate way to think about someone else's culture, and it becomes really important because, like my dad said, for a long period of time, grocery stores sort of had the same model and they did the same thing everywhere they went. And so, if you think about it, it doesn't really make sense because you're targeting someone's food to someone who doesn't consume that food. He didn't bring this particular example up, but we serve a lot of Muslim customers where our stores are. And one day he asked them, why aren't you buying our meats and our chicken? And so it sort of brings up the question similar to us with Judaism. We don't eat kosher, but some Muslim customers need halal food. And so if you're a business person, not only is it the right thing to do to sort of understand what your customers wants and needs are, but it also is a good business decision because you're not going to sell products to someone who doesn't want those products. And so that was something that obviously I learned from him, but also was really important about this food marketing degree at St. Joe's.
So that's a great point. How do you identify sources for halal food, for example, and does it come with storage and transportation and serving requirements or guidelines as kosher food does for Jews who keep kosher?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. In the food business that utilizes robotics and AI software, and it has sort of got the system down to you don't need a lot of thinkers to run a traditional grocery store. That is, if you're serving all middle-income Caucasians, and that's not what we're serving. And so when you have customized stores that serve the people that live in very diverse neighborhoods, it's the exact opposite. There are no well-established food distribution systems, and we have to go to great lengths to secure the food our customers eat. And it's anything but robotic or AI driven. And a lot of times we have to put people in business to get us the food we need, because especially in the early days of us doing this, it just didn't exist in Philadelphia. And some cases didn't exist in our country. And often to get a very important dish, we might have to make it from scratch because you couldn't get it. For example, our Southern African-American consumers in the South, a proper dessert is sweet potato pie. And the way they made it in the South didn't exist here in the North. And so we undertook learning about that, understanding what the authentic outcome of the product would be. And we built a sweet potato business around it that we ended up learning what we learned from the pies and expanded it to a whole line of goods that's completely unique and doesn't exist anywhere else.
Well, did you go down to the U.S. South to consult or to talk or watch to learn? How did you get that knowledge and skill?
Yeah, so we have visited places all over the country to learn about things. And as we learned more, a lot of them were interested in things we did. And so we would have a situation where we would visit each other and each of us would teach the other grocer about things that we did to accommodate our customers. And so it was definitely not a book on this stuff. It's a bunch of committed people trying to learn and do better for people. And so I know we had one partnership with HEB in Texas, where we taught them how to make our sweet potato pies, and they taught us how to make a fire grilled chicken that we ended up putting in a number of stores. So we learn the hard way. And often our employees would teach us as well.
Yeah.
Or in modern day, we could talk about this later, but we have incubated a number of entrepreneurs of color. And a lot of times we just can't get it right. And we have found entrepreneurs that we could help get in business and open up a small department or kiosk in our stores because we wanted the exactly right, authentic product. And that's how we got there.
Yeah, you mentioned entrepreneurs. And in our previous conversation, you had a very interesting take, I thought, on the entrepreneurial skills that you were seeing in or knew existed in some of your workers. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that really started at a town hall meeting in West Philly. One of our future customers was saying to me how much they appreciated our philosophy and they want us to stay in business. They want future generations of Browns to be there. They want to count on that. And they're worried. They're worried that we may not be there. And I asked them, why would you be worried? They said, because you're building multi-million-dollar businesses to serve people that have low incomes and will always have low incomes. And I'm like, well, why would you say that? And she explains to me that such a huge amount of people have been incarcerated in underprivileged neighborhoods, the problem of mass incarceration. And that once you've been incarcerated, nobody will give you a job. It's almost impossible to get a job. And she challenged me with fixing that problem. And she said, if you fix that problem, you will have the best locations in the world. If the people you're serving now that are very poor could one day get good jobs, you'll be the very smartest businessman because you will have all the greatest locations in all these areas. And I asked her questions about it. And of course, I went back and started to educate myself on the problem of mass incarceration. And with the opening of that store at 52nd and Jefferson, which now dates back, I think 15 years ago, we hired our first half a dozen returning citizens, our formerly incarcerated folks. And a number of those young people were incarcerated for drug offenses. Matter of fact, a number of them wouldn't have gone to jail today because of how the laws evolved. Anyway, we were surprised because we didn't know what we were doing, but we had a lot of really significant successes in our first 6. And one of the things we learned early on that, like Scott mentioned, he doesn't love school, but he is a natural entrepreneur. And you could tell that he is, and he has a great personality. And I like school, but I was also always an entrepreneur since I was a young kid. And what I saw before me were entrepreneurs just like Scott and I, except for their circumstances were different. They lived in impoverished, violent neighborhoods with no job opportunities, but they were the ambitious ones. And yes, their ambition took them in the wrong direction in that they did something that was against the law, but their thinking, their capacity was just like Scott and I. And I almost immediately recognized that there's so much human potential there that a lot of these young people go into the drug trade and get killed or incarcerated. And they're just like entrepreneurs that I know growing up, young entrepreneurs. And so what we discovered after a short period of time, that these kinds of returning citizens accelerated into management at an incredible rate because they really understood the concepts of inventory, customer service, margin, shrinkage, payroll. They understood those things because in their business, they used a lot of those things. Without any education, it was inherent. And so we really had quite an incredible experience with them. And today, out of our 2,300 Philadelphia area employees, 500 are returning citizens. And we have an incredible number in management that are just doing fantastic. And so I'm really excited about that work because most of society reads about bad things in the paper and have written off these millions of people in this country who have been incarcerated. And I think they misunderstand the human potential that they're writing off, that the human potential is incredible.
Wow, it's a great insight and just a terrific story about how you took that insight and turned it into such a positive thing. Scott, I think you were telling me before that you were also involved in the program uh, of finding jobs and providing training for returning citizens in the food service industry. Is that my memory correct on that?
It is.
Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, my dad founded a program called Uplift Solutions. It was founded with the purpose of trying to bring, his ability to solve food deserts to other areas. I think, that became harder, especially politically, to do as one person. But something that we gained that was also a pretty unique insight was our work around hiring formerly incarcerated people really had the ability to grow to a lot of other companies because, in the U.S. there's a pretty big shortage of employees, especially right now for almost every low wage job, and so it's pretty hard to find people to work in grocery stores and restaurants and a lot of other really useful industries where there's a lot of unemployment and there's a lot of people who can't get jobs. And so one thing that we wanted to do was try and create a program that could replicate what we did with hiring formerly incarcerated people. And so originally we took all the graduates, and then we started to say, let's get other companies to agree to take some as well. And it didn't just have to be in the food space. I mean, there's the logistics and trucking industry has a massive lack of people who are willing to work there, but these jobs pay really well. And so the long-term thought is that, you could hire anyone could be trained to work this job and be put into, one of these slots. And so, we started it taking all the employees, and the thought was, we want to make sure that if someone's going through this program that they're leaving with a job, because, you've been incarcerated. If you're out of jail, now is sort of your chance to try and get a job. And if you can't get one, it's really discouraging. And, you also don't have a way to pay for things without a job. And so it makes it your only path is to go back to jail. And so, our one thought was, if we're going to do this, let's make sure that we guarantee every graduate of the program a job. And so we did that, and I worked there for a little while. And one thing that was really incredible is we really followed through with this. And so where in society about 70% of people released from prison go back, from our program 2%. So of our 500 graduates, 10 people went back to prison. And we saw this was also good for employers because they were staying longer than the average employee. They were moving up faster. And so, like he said, these are people who society wrote off that are actually really high achievers, and it also solved the problem that people were just constantly going to keep going back to prison, and that was really impactful.
Wow, that's fabulous. But let me ask you a question. How did the pandemic and the economic contraction in our country impact that program, and how is it doing now, or what do you see as possibly its prospects going forward from this point?
So we weren't permitted to meet in person, so that ended our classroom work. So we did pivot and provide the content online, and online was good, but not as good. And we also ran into other problems that when we would send the graduates to employment, there was chaos. Businesses were closed down, so it was a very rough year. And I would say it was a rough year for everybody. But sure, for the very poor, it was rougher. It was rougher for all kinds of technical reasons. The government, I don't think holistically has a clear understanding of people who live in poverty, what they go through, how they operate their life. And although I think they have good intentions to help them at a difficult time, they just left out lots of people. And so, we did what we could, but it certainly was not like the year before, the production. But we're finally starting to get back on track now. But interesting, our biggest training facility was at Enon Baptist Church. We embedded it in the church, and the church used their ministries to help our graduates with other problems they had, like if you had a marital problem. I thought that was an interesting way to get extra services without an extra cost. And the church still hasn't reopened for church services. They do them all virtually. So, we're just coming out of it. So we had to find alternative locations, and we're just starting to get back into action. But there was definitely, it was a setback.
You touched on a topic that I think is a pretty complex one, but I'm going to ask you about it if you have any thoughts about it. The respective roles of government, the private sector, faith-based organizations, and community organizations in addressing, well, food insecurity for sure, but also other social issues facing poor people.
Well, I'm fond of public-private partnerships. I found that they're more potent. I'm also kind of biased on entrepreneurial-led. Now, you could be an entrepreneurial thinker and be in government or be in a nonprofit, but generally, the entrepreneurs are in business. And, an entrepreneur just thinks differently. And I know in my case, I never stay in my own lane and think, well, this is how my business works. I look at the whole thing, the government, religion, nonprofits, foundations, businesses. And I'm saying to myself, the way we have this organized, the way we have society organized, we're having some unintended consequences that are severe. And how would we best change that? And then I like going to the different sectors I need and seeing if there's room for change. And that's what I kind of did with the Obama administration. The Obamas were very interested in our food desert work, and we work with them, and we're one of the architects of the Let's Move campaign. And that was very much about movement in different sectors of our economy to get something done. So if you remember, prior to President Obama becoming the president, he had a debate with Hillary Clinton in Philadelphia. And he came in early for the debate, and he decided to stop in a supermarket. He stopped in one of our supermarkets. And, he was surprised because he's been all over the country in poor neighborhoods, and there really wasn't another thing like this anywhere. And so he was immediately wondering, why could we do it in Philadelphia, but we can't do it in Chicago or Los Angeles or Houston? And so they had called us almost immediately to ask, could we advise them? They thought there might be food issues that would come up in the debate. And we told them, sure. But it turns out there were no food issues that turned up in the debate. And later he became the president and called us back to see if there's something the federal government could do to help encourage the elimination of food deserts around the country. And that's when we started to work with them and map out a part of the Let's Move campaign to deal with healthy food access. And we had worked on, a program that involved the Treasury, Health and Human Services, and Agriculture, working together as a team with local governments and the private sector to try to solve these food desert problems all over the country. And, we have had a lot of successes in getting stores open in places that never had a store. So I thought we were making good progress, although it's a very difficult problem. And it's always frustrating how long it takes to solve a really complex problem.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Scott, I don't know how far along you are in your academic program, but is there acknowledgement and understanding or even thought leadership from the university or the program you're in about the kind of partnerships that government and businesses can work on together to collaborate with to solve problems?
Yeah, and I'm to answer your first question, I'm sort of finishing up at school. I think throughout my time there, I had some really interesting classes, sort of focused on on food, but how it affects people, and we had some interesting conversations around actually food deserts and a lot of these issues that we discuss. And part of what's interesting is when you're so focused on marketing of food, you really come into a lot of issues like this And so that was something that was interesting. St. Joe's in this program acknowledges and understands the problem, and sort of teaches how a lot of other people, actually they used us as an example, so that was nice, but how people are starting to solve this problem, because a lot of the students from there then go to every major food company, and this way they sort of already understand how to address things like food deserts and things like that.
Mhm. All right, good. All right, maybe switch gears a little bit just to make sure I ask this question of the two of you, but sort of looking at two sides of the same coin, which is how your being Jewish motivated you to pursue your business in the way that you have, and then how has your pursuit, if of your business as you do it, if it has at all, has it strengthened your Jewish identity in any way?
Well, up till recently, I did what came to mind, and I thought I would give my dad credit to say I learned a lot of these things from my dad, but to understand Tikkun Olam and to think that it's not related to what we do, it doesn't make sense. It seems completely related. So I really do think the Jewish education I had and the learnings, I have to think that that's changed my thinking as a person, whether I recognize it completely or not, because my behavior is so consistent with what we're taught to do in Judaism that I would have to believe that it had a major influence on both my previous generations and myself to cause us to, look at business in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I'll answer the same thing. Just I wasn't particularly religious growing up. We went to synagogue for holidays and all that, and I was bar mitzvahed, but I didn't really think as a young kid that I was like doing things because of my religion, like my dad said. But then you start to see things like at my bar mitzvah, and a lot of friends give out a portion of their money or do something for society, and I think it just goes back to with or without thinking about it, it's a Jewish value to give back, and it's something that I definitely, it stemmed through the family, but it stemmed from hopefully a religious piece as well. He mentioned a little bit about entrepreneurship, but he didn't really get to talk about sort of what we do with local entrepreneurs and things like that. I think it'd be a really interesting conversation piece.
Yeah. So during the pandemic, we really were concerned about small businesses, especially small minority businesses, and some colleagues of mine. Actually, I'm thinking 3 out of the 4 founders were Jewish, coincidentally, started the PA 30-day fund. And we started a fund to help keep businesses alive during a difficult time. We noticed that in particular, a lot of the small minority owned businesses were not getting PPP. There's various reasons for that. And we just think that these small businesses are so much the character of every community, and the service they provide goes way beyond their goods and services. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So we started the fund, and we weren't sure how much money we could raise, but it ends up we raised $3.5 million in a very short period of time. And wow. we had funded close to 1,100 businesses that we gave $3,000 to keep them alive. And someone from the board would call them and say, you've been approved for this money, and we want to see, is there anything else we could do to help you? And so I asked to have all the Philadelphia minority-owned businesses, I'll call them at night. And so I called a great deal of them. And, a lot of them shopped in my stores. So they're a small business I was concerned about that support their own community, but they also support my business too. And a lot of them had food or food-related businesses. And they said, I always wanted to sit down and talk to you and see if there isn't some sort of collaboration we could do. So out of that came 60 collaborations. or I have 60 new mentors that occurred over the last year. And we built a system which we didn't have before of helping these small businesses, develop their skills, build up their capability. We start them off with a little pop-up. And then when we see there's consumer interest, we guide them into build the bigger businesses. And some of them have restaurants in our supermarkets or are on the shelves permanently. And in working with them, I think a lot about the anemic entrepreneurship among certain minority groups, especially Black Americans. And, I think the way our community did well, Jewish people came here, a lot of them started businesses, but it wasn't that was important. Those businesses hired people from the neighborhood, and that lifted up the prospects of the neighborhood. And so if you have an anemic entrepreneurship rate, you don't have part of the American dream at work that accomplishes the miracle of job creation and opportunities at the early stage business that grow into much bigger opportunities as the business grows, and then ultimately philanthropic activity that comes from that, and the whole system that repeats itself. And so, there's reasons why would it not work in some groups, but work in other groups. And I have to tell you, after dealing with, close to 1,100 businesses and my intense focus on minority businesses, I think the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well among all races. And I think unintentionally, we built a society that makes it more difficult than it needs to be. And if we want to solve the poverty problem and the inequity problem, we have to free people up to start businesses. And some will be little businesses and some will end up big businesses, but we really need that. And so I think for our future, and you may think that this is a future for Black people, but it's not just for Black people or not just for Latinx people. For our city to work right, for our country to work right, we need everyone to take the path that they're meant to take. And it helps us all, because when you think about most of the problems you rattle off in this city, whether it's gun violence, poor health outcomes, poor educational outcomes, they're all poverty related. And the poverty problem is the lack of work opportunities and the lack of entrepreneurship and the not appropriate education, not aligned education. And so it really leads me to be very hopeful that we have a very high potential future if we're smart enough to seize it.
Thank you so much for joining us and for listening to this really important interview. If you are interested in getting more involved with Breaking Bread on Broad or anything at Congregation Road of Shalom, we invite you to check out our website, roadofshalom.org, or to email BBOB, that stands for Breaking Bread on Broad, BBOB at roadofshalom.org. Thank you.